Leadership. In this world of conflicted interests and polemic politics, we need it more than ever. But in a post-industrial networked age, we seem to want more bottom-up than top-down. The Arab Spring, the Tea Party, and Occupy Wall Street demonstrate the power of leaderless phenomenons. So how do we reconcile having less control with retaining inspiring command over an organization? And does a more collaborative approach give the community-oriented Pacific Northwest a competitive advantage on the global stage? As we'll learn from a visionary entrepreneur and an inspirational soccer coach, it's about designing a new model for motivation. I'm Hanson Hossein. Welcome to Four Peaks. Peter Fewing has mastered the peak of community. He coached Seattle University's men's soccer team to national championships in both 1997 and 2004. He has brought the joy and discipline of soccer to so many kids over the last 3 decades through his popular soccer camp. And Peter has just co-written a book on leadership on and beyond the pitch, which begs the question, what's the secret to his coaching success? Peter, welcome.
Thank you very much for having me.
So you've been around leadership soccer for decades. How has the concept of leadership changed for you during this time?
Well, athletes have changed, and athletes' input has become much more important to the success of a team. When I was a kid growing up, it was coach says jump, you say how high. Now, if coach says jump, they want to know what the work to rest ratios are. They want to know when the next game is. If we're jumping too close to a game, they want to know the surface they're jumping on. So you have to be able to answer those questions before they ask.
So what's that all about? Why have the athletes actually changed? What's given them the impetus to actually be so forward and actually question the coach?
Lack of fear. They don't fear the coach anymore. So you have to earn their respect, and it's not, top down. Players have information. They have access to information. They're not afraid to speak their opinions, and so you have to work with them in order to get the most out of them.
So for you, this must be a cultural shift as a leader.
Well, it is. I'm young enough to not have it be a huge impact, and my nature as a coach and a leader is not so much top-down. I do want to get opinions from the players, so I'm willing to listen to them, but it is definitely a shift. You have to explain a lot more in advance at the beginning of practice as to how the session will go in order for it to be successful.
So since you've experienced both cultures, both the traditional more top-down and this more, consultative, which one do you prefer?
I like the latter. I'm fine with it. Now, they still need leadership. They still need someone to step up and say, this is how hard we're going to work. This is where we're going to go. Sometimes you have to say, no, we're not going to do it the way you would like it to go today. But I like their input. And really, the only way you're going to succeed is if you get the athletes to buy in.
Okay. It sounds very interesting because it sounds to me because they have more information, some of that information is coming from their use of technology, right? They're probably watching games on television, they're getting tips from internet, they're talking to their friends on social media. So there's this technological factor involved in this change in leadership.
Yeah, absolutely. They can go online and Google what Manchester United's doing at practice. And if they say, hey, Sir Alex Ferguson is doing this at training, why aren't we doing this at training? You do have a lot more competition to be successful as a coach. Other coaches doing good things, you sometimes have to follow along with them.
So in the technology world, there's this cliche, it sounds like now, that you should fail early, fail fast, and that's part of success. It took you 10 years to win your first championship at Seattle University. Do we need some time to bake in success and through leadership? Do you need time to be a good leader?
You do need time to be a good leader. I think you reach your prime. I think I'm 49 right now, and I think I'm in my prime years of leading because I have experience to draw from. I have confidence to draw from, but I think it does take time. Mike Krzyzewski at Duke, where they won their first national championship in basketball, 10 years. John Wooden, UCLA, 16 years before they won their first. And you've got to get the culture right. When a team loses a game or loses a playoff game, they come back the next year, hopefully, more determined. So it takes time to build that trust. It takes time to build that experience. It can't be an overnight thing.
So how do you teach the leader's leader, the people who are expecting results, how do you teach them patience to say, you know what, it's not going to happen in my first year here as a coach?
You have to work your tail off. You have to give them you've got to work so hard that they can't question what you're doing, to be honest with you. So if I'm a coach and I have an owner, I have to put in the time and do such an efficient job and such a thorough job that they can at least say, okay, he's giving it his best. And then you got to communicate above you to let them know that you are doing the work.
It's amazing because you think in this attention-starved world where you want results immediately, that kind of patience doesn't exist anymore.
The window is a lot shorter. It's a much shorter window. I think, in the professional world, 3-year contracts, you can be happy with those. 4-year contracts are very unusual. So people want results quickly.
You spent most of your life in soccer itself.
Yeah.
Is there something specific or special about soccer and its relationship with leadership?
Well, it is unique. It's not. It's a sport that requires. It's sort of Plato's Republic. Every job is important, right? And no job is more important than the other. And so you need an entire team to be successful. One superstar cannot take on. We have 11 on each side, right? One guy by himself against another team of 11 has no chance. So everybody has to do their job.
So how do you take that? How do you take the lessons they're learning in soccer and leadership and success? How does that translate to real life?
After we won our second championship, in this picture right here, about 20 minutes after that picture was taken, I said, hey, here's what you've learned this season. You've learned about self-talk. You've learned about goal setting, visualization. You've learned about trust. You've learned how to believe. You've learned how to be disciplined and sacrifice. And I said, and as a national champion, only 100 guys are going to get rings this year. Right? Well, you can be a national champion husband, father, community guy, employee, and a national and champion employer as well.
Well, in fact, there's a great line in your book that the majority of student leaders will become future leaders elsewhere.
Yeah.
So when you're actually coaching a team, no matter how old your players, do you have that horizon in mind?
Absolutely, absolutely. We have great assistant coaches that we've worked with, and one of them, Herbie Hoffman, has always talked about transformational leadership. So when we're talking about how we do something, we also will bring in, this is how you got to be when you're a husband. This is how you got to be when you're a father. When the way we leave a hotel room, we always have windows open. Toilet has to be in good shape. We throw the soap away so someone else doesn't have to touch their soap that's turned into yogurt, right? And we leave the windows open because we would go 4 guys to a room in the fall in California, and it gets musty. It's a nice way of saying it, right? But I get phone calls from guys when they're on vacations with their wives years after they play and say, Coach, we're leaving the hotel, and I'm explaining to my 2-year-old why we have to leave the windows open. So
that's amazing to me.
It has to transfer.
Why did it sink in? Did you scare them into this?
No.
How did you convince them that this was the right thing to do?
So here's our view on leadership, and this isn't my own thought. It's been a collaborative effort with all the coaches we work with. Initially, you say, this is where we're going, and you point the direction, and then you have little conversations everywhere. You have conversations at the airport, you have conversations at breakfast, you have conversations in the van, and eventually you're pulling them, and eventually they start doing the things without you having to tell them. And eventually you're walking side by side with them. And then once they get to that place, then they've taken ownership of the success of the program. And you win on the field and you win off the field. The teams we had were excellent in the classroom. There's no difference between performance on the field, behavior in the community, and performance in the classroom.
Now, until you get to that tipping point where they actually get the idea, get the lesson, and they actually start adopting that behavior change, are you a lonely person? Do you feel like you're living in a cave as a leader that, my God, nobody really is going to pay attention to me, and I feel like I'm just alone?
No, you know what? Because I torture them with conversation after conversation. I won't let them, I don't miss a chance to try to encourage them to do things the right way, and then explain why it's important that how we treat the women's team. We got a men's team at Seattle U when I was there, and we had a women's team, and how we treated the women's team was very important. No different than how we make runs down the flanks. So I'm wired that way as a coach. I'm wired that way to keep trying to look for allies, 1 or 2 players who will buy in, and then hopefully that permeates to the rest of the team.
I've got to ask this because you've spoken about the importance of trust as a successful leader. And as we know with what's happened at Penn State, that trust was abused.
Right.
What's your view on how that has been handled, and from a leadership point of view?
Well, at the end of the day, a leader has to be accountable for the behavior of his people. So they missed the mark in a huge way in that situation. And it's, to me, that is such a tragedy that occurred, because no one around young people should be allowed to violate that trust.
What do you think is the fundamental ingredient to building that trustful relationship then as a leader?
Yeah, you have to invest in your guys. People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And so you have to spend a lot of time. You have to understand that your player's story will be your story. Their story is going to be your story someday. So you have to invest in them. You got to love them, and you also have to be firm but fair. You have to act out of reason and not impulse. And you've got to listen to the players. Sometimes they will give you information, and if you listen to them, then they'll be more inclined to listen to you.
That's interesting. In fact, you point this out in the book on the importance of stories. And this is
Yeah.
exactly the opposite to this top-down leadership culture that might have existed 20 or 30 years ago. You're listening to each other. Why are those stories so important?
Yeah, they keep the lineage of the program going. If you showed up at practice, I would introduce you to the guys, and they would have to listen to you. And alumni would come in, and I would always ask the alumni who played, whether they played during the time I coached or even before the time I coached. I always say, "What do you want to tell these guys?" And they would inevitably say the same thing: "This is the greatest time of your life. Work your tail off. Listen to the coach." And they don't always say listen to the coach, actually, but they did say it was the greatest time of your life. And so the stories, because I will tell them, I'll say to our team that at that moment, as you're carrying the torch for this program. And one day the torch is going to be passed to somebody else. And while you're carrying the torch, you've got to create your own story so that I can tell people about you someday.
How do you communicate those stories authentically? How do they know, and how do you know it's not just an act, empty words, sound bites?
It's got to come from within, right? That passion has to come from within. For me, it's not hard to be fired up to tell the good of the people that have played on teams before. And it's not hard to talk about the successes of the team and the failures of the team. You have to learn from both successes and failures. So you can't fake it. I don't think you can fake leadership. You either care about your people or you don't, or you care about your direction or you don't. Yeah.
Success, failure, transformation, stories. Is there a narrative arc to the life of a player on a team?
There
the
is.
beginning, middle, and end, for example?
Yeah, and it is fun to be able to see where those stories start and where they end. For some of our guys, today I met with a former player who was a dentist, right? And he was on the first team that I coached. And then another dentist to be, we were recruiting him. So then they started communicating. And then 10 years later, a third came into the program. And so sometimes you tell the story of the player, and then sometimes you tell the story of what they're doing in their career after. So it just depends. Some stories are finite, and some stories continue to go on and on.
That must make for compelling reading.
It does. Yes, it does.
Credibility as a leader. I've always wondered this, especially when I'm watching professional sports and television. Sometimes the coach is the most overweight guy there.
Yeah.
And it's like, how on earth does this fit young man follow that coach? Do you have had to have the experience of being the best player a few years ago so people will follow you? Or is there another kind of quality that players are looking in that leader?
Players want sincerity, and they want intensity, and they want you to be more committed than they are, right? And so everything speaks. There's no question that everything speaks. So how I would dress coming to training speaks about how serious I am. How I would dress going on the road speaks to how serious I would be. Players are going to look at your discipline, and you're going to set the standards. You're going to set the standards. How you treat people in restaurants, how you run training, you will set the standards for your players, no question. So leadership, everything you do speaks to your players, and they will follow your lead, because they're always looking. They're critical and they're competitive, and if they don't sense that you are completely in control and on top of things, they'll back off. They'll back away.
Do these same concepts and lessons apply to kids? Because we're talking mostly about older men, basically.
Yeah.
Right? So what are we talking about with kids? Do you have to do leadership differently for that?
No, you know what's great? So Tuesday night, I'm coaching a U15 boys team, and last year we did not win a game. And so I took the team over, and we've won 9 games so far this fall. And on Tuesday, I said, "Do you see how you've gotten better? Do you see how your language is better with each other? Your self-talk is better with each other? Do you see that you're more disciplined?" And I mentioned one of the young men, and I said, we took you out of a game because you pushed somebody, and then you had to sit down, and I torture you by talking to you on the sidelines, and you didn't get to play for quite a while. One of his teammates, beautiful, one of his teammates says, "Yeah, I didn't like so-and-so." And they were sitting right next to each other, and the kid looked at him like, What do you mean you didn't like me? We changed his behavior so that he could play. You know, so I don't think it changes.
And it sounds like that behavior change is what it takes. That attitude that's what it takes to win. And I love this line: winning means you can say less and impact more.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. If you've won, I don't wear the rings. I don't wear the rings on purpose because I don't need to now. We've got three national championships. We won another one this summer with the exact same thing at a completely different level in the PDL, which is the 4th division of professional soccer. And we won the national title. It was on national TV. It was I was shocked. It was the exact same recipe.
Well, we'll conclude this segment on a winning note. And when we return, who needs job titles? Why do we expect people to show up at the office every day? Why work 9 to 5? These are all questions our next guest asked of himself as the leader of a groundbreaking startup company. The digital revolution has turned communications upside down. It poses challenges and opportunities to professionals seeking to influence and persuade. These are our students in the Master of Communication and Digital Media program, innovators who think entrepreneurially about how to engage communities through storytelling. As creative leaders, together we're charting the future of communication. Want to join us? Find out more at mcdm.uw.edu.